Hi, I'm Peter J. Ray. Welcome. Today's topic is Resalest Remarkable Books, number 58. The first book today is Further Prophecies of Nostradamus by Erica Cheatham, 1985. Well, prophecy is always an interesting topic, trying to predict the future. And the one thing that I got out of this book was it talks a lot about the Vatican, how the Vatican is the greatest power on earth. That they have a tremendous amount of wealth. This is, the center of you could say, the leadership of the Catholic Church in Rome. A lot of wealth, 1 billion supporters, and their agenda, actually is, everyone has an agenda, and the Catholic Church wants the whole world to be Catholic, not only all Christians but other religions as well. And all these different people, and then there are Muslims who want the whole world to be Muslim, and so forth, and these different people with agendas to conquer the world politically or religiously or whatever. And so I think with prophecy is interesting because if you are a spiritual person, you study history, I think you can have an idea about the future. But the thing is, we have free will, and whatever's coming in the future can change based on the actions of human beings today. And the more and more people become spiritual, and then that can change history. That can change the future. Because hopefully, if there's enough spirituality, people evolving spiritually, we can avoid nuclear war. So we'll have to see. Very, very interesting. The next book is Into the Mountains: Hostage by the Abu Sayyaf by Jose Torres Jr., 2001. This book is set in Basilan Island, near Zamboanga, Mindanao, in the Philippines, and it's a beautiful island, relatively small island, but it's been the scene of conflict between Christian Filipinos and Muslim Filipinos, and there are all these groups involved: teachers, priests, terrorists. There's kidnapping, war in this beautiful island, which is a paradise spoiled by human greed, violence, and cruelty. It has heroes and villains. And I guess this individual, the author, the Abu Sayyaf is this radical Muslim terrorist group who does kidnap people and, trying to get money. This guy, I think, was a prisoner of them, Jose Torres. So it's the front lines on the war between the conflict between radical Muslims and the rest of the world in the southern Philippines, because the south was pretty much Mindanao and the areas near the southern Philippines had a relatively small population, and then a lot of Christian Filipinos were moving in, and so there's been a scene of this conflict. And then you have the international Muslims, radicals who have been shipping weapons into the southern Philippines to promoting war. Promoting holy war. So it's an ongoing thing. It's been going on actually since when the Spanish came to the Philippines. Islam spread from Arabia across Central Asia into Southeast Asia, and Indonesia's Muslim, and into what became the Philippines. And the Philippines was in the process of becoming a Muslim archipelago. And then when the Spanish came and interrupted that, and the Spanish, under the Spanish influence, Filipinos became Catholic Christians. If they hadn't come, actually the Filipinos would be Muslim. But anyway, the Filipinos had the Spanish had a long struggle with Muslims in the south. They pushed Muslims to the south. Manila was actually a Muslim kingdom, and then it's been this ongoing conflict into the American period up until now, with the Philippines an independent country. Very interesting. A scene of international conflict, really. The next book is The Magicians of God: The Amazing Stories of Philippine Faith Healers by Jaime T. Licauco, 1981. Jaime Licauco writes columns, kind of spiritual columns, for the Philippine Daily Inquirer newspaper. I actually spoke with him on the telephone. We talked about Lemuria and how Philippines is a remnant of Lemuria, in my opinion. So this book is about Filipinos who reportedly do surgery with their bare hands and are able to remove tumors and so forth. So it's I guess it's very debatable. But the thing is, when you're sick and you go to the doctor in the West, in Europe, or anywhere in the world, and the doctors do what they can, but then you get to the point maybe they can't help you, and then you're dying. And there have been people coming to the Philippines, Filipinos and foreigners coming looking for healing, and there have been reports that they have been healed by these faith healers. And I think I think it could be true, because the power of God is unlimited, and I believe saints have spiritual power and very spiritual people. So this could happen. This could be true, because if you read the story of Jesus and Lazarus, his friend Lazarus, who died, and Jesus brought him back from the dead. So I think this is true. It involves the healing power of God, which is we really are only now beginning to explore that, because we've had such a faith in the 20th century in Western medicine, and which has certainly made a major contribution to human health. But there's something more than that there is a power of God. And I really believe this. And in our own lives, if we are very, very sick, one thing we can do is really try to be positive and pray and contact God, and that can really help us to defeat the disease. Our guru Paramahansa Yogananda said that an unwelcome visitor will leave, and that a disease is an unwelcome visitor. And but if we embrace it, and really sort of relish all the attention we get from people, and then that kind of will encourage the disease to, and we complain about it, then the disease will spread, and we don't get better. Very interesting. The next book is Saddam, His Rise and Fall by Con Coghlan, 2002. This is a biography of Saddam Hussein, the former dictator of Iraq, and very interesting life. He was born extremely poor, and he lived a life of violence, evil, fear, and greed. After his arrest by the U.S., after the U.S. invasion, he was found in this, they call it a spider hole underground, and I remember, it was interesting. He told the soldiers, I am the president of Iraq, and I'm willing to negotiate, reportedly. And anyway, after he was arrested, he wrote a letter to his wife, Sahida, and he wrote this, quote, "As for my spirits and morale, they are high, thanks to the greatness of God." So he was a pretty bad guy, and but one thing we learned about Iraq, we thought if we removed Saddam, the U.S. thought that that Iraq could become a democratic country. And the thing is, we realized over the years that the problems of Iraq are much deeper than Saddam, that he was sort of a symptom of this hatred between Sunnis and Shiite Iraqis. And then you have the Kurds as well. So that's the thing. Democracy involves respect. And as long as people hate each other, that's not respectful. So very interesting topic. Anyway, Saddam Hussein, this one of the notorious villains of our time. Very interesting. The next book is The Long Surrender by Burke Davis, 1985. This is a really, really wonderful history book. It's the story of the end of the U.S. Civil War and the aftermath, particularly the mistreatment of the Confederate President Jefferson Davis. So when the war, this was Southerners. It was unthinkable, actually, for so many of them, to lose the war. And that's really why the war went on so long. They really fought. They gave it everything they had. And Jefferson Davis was the president of the Confederacy that was trying to, become an independent country of the United States. And he was actually a good guy. And the war, wars create a lot of hard feelings and or exacerbate hard feelings. And so he was not treated well after the war, and he was in prison in sort of harsh conditions. So it talks about this and some of the things the guys in the South thought about doing, like fleeing into Texas, trying to continue the war, but eventually it came to an end. And the sad thing is the death of Abraham Lincoln. Once the war ended, we needed to heal the wounds of the war, and Lincoln could have done that, but he was gone. He was gone, and then unfortunately, folks in the North, they wanted revenge. They wanted to punish the South, which really was a bad thing to do. We have to forgive, and I think the South was wrong to try to secede, to leave the Union, and it was good they were defeated. But there should be respect for those men and what they had done, because they were just, basically doing what they thought was right, serving their country. And we didn't have they had a strong sense that in the South that a cultural conflict with the North based on the urban-rural difference. And so anyway, it was we had this. That's why it's called The Long Surrender. And very, very wonderful history book, American history. Guy did a good job. The next book is The Square Peg by Orrin Hatch, 2002. This is the story of a Mormon American senator. Orrin Hatch is the author, from Utah. And so he's a really good man, and describes his battle for the good of America. The political deals that have to be made, Democrats and Republicans. I really enjoyed this. He talks about trying to stand up for what's right and facing, the tough world of politics with a lot of bad things going on often. But you could tell he was a really good guy, and he's a Mormon. I think the Mormons are a wonderful church. They're good people. They don't believe in drinking, and they have, they have a strong spiritual life. And this Orrin Hatch, from what I can tell, was a good fellow and had a positive influence on American politics through his service in the U.S. Senate, U.S. Senator from Utah. The next book is Prairie Whispers by Francis Arrington, 2003. This is a novel set in the American prairie. It's the flatlands in the West, the areas around Kansas, Nebraska, and that area, these Iowa, these flatlands. And in this story, there's a family that has a stillborn baby. In other words, the baby was born dead. Very tragic. And then the daughter, Colleen, she's given a newborn baby at the same time to keep. And so I think she was, her sister was the stillborn, that had died. And so there's something happened where they had to folks asked him if they could take care of this baby for a while, and so she decided to keep the baby, and to act like this, and she tried to say, well, this is going to be our baby now, and she acted like the stranger's baby was theirs, which led to trouble, obviously, when the parents came back to get their baby, but there was a happy ending, and I can't remember what it was, but it was a good story. It shows people in a tough situation, the death of a newly born baby, and then this option that she had. She thought, oh, wait, we got a replacement here. Well, let's have this baby, but it wasn't theirs. So very, very, very good story. Good period piece from American history. The next book is The Seamstress by Sarah Tuval Bernstein, with Louise Lutz Thornton and Marlene Bernstein Samuels, 1997. It's a true story. It's a story of a Romanian Jewish woman who survived the Holocaust. The Holocaust, of course, is when 6 million European Jewish people were murdered by Nazi Germany. And so the author, I guess her name was, can't remember. Anyway, she became independent at a young age. Yeah, she really was interested in taking care of herself and working. She survived the Ravensbrück death camp. Very strong woman. She was determined to survive and find out how the story would end. Later, she moved to America. In this Ravensbrück death camp, she was there with these other Jewish prisoners. They had to work during the day. It's some tough jobs, some tough physical labor. They were being worked to death. They had very little food, and they couldn't. I don't think they were able to bathe very often, if at all, and long working hours, and the place where they stayed wasn't heated, very cold, so they were enduring these very, very harsh conditions, which actually this was part of the German plan. Instead of just killing people, you can work them to death, which they did in these death camps. So she was there with a number of family members, siblings, and cousins, and she was trying to, rally their spirits. She had a strong spirit, and at the end of the workday, they'd come back to the dormitory, which was huge areas where had bunk beds, like several bunks, and among her relatives, they'd be so tired, they're depressed, they're tired, and some of them, a lot of the Jews who died, they just gave up because it was so horrible what they were going through. And she did her best, this character, or this woman, to try to help everyone stay alive. And the thing is, in this dormitory, if you slept on the ground floor, it was colder down there because I think it was the window was open, and so she decided we have to get everybody sleeping up on a top bunk where it was warmer. Heat rises, and so she had sisters and cousins who were, they just want to lay. A lot of them they just wanted to die, or they just wanted to fall asleep. And if she believed if they slept on the bottom bunk, they might die because it's too cold, and they were so tired they could freeze to death overnight, and this would hasten their death. So this was her role she played to help try to keep her relatives alive. And again, this wonderful thought. She said she wondered years later why she stayed alive, and she said they all knew that Nazi Germany had conquered Europe, all of Europe except for Great Britain, and they were this very evil government. And everyone was suffering horribly in Europe. And she was curious about how, like she wrote, how the story was going to end. And because she decided to live, to stay alive, and to keep going through these hard times, and not just give up and die, she was able to see the war end. And she was able to see Nazi Germany defeated, which was satisfying. And the people of Europe were liberated, except for those of Eastern Europe, tragically, who became to be under the influence and domination of the Soviet Union and communist governments. Anyway, so this woman, she ended up traveling. Eventually, she moved to the U.S. and she met another Jewish guy who'd been through hard times in the war, and they had a family in America. And and then she at one point, her daughter was complaining about something in school when she was, like 14, and she said, "Oh, I'll just die if I have to give this talk in front of the class." And then her mother said, "It's not that easy to die." So she died relatively not too young. I think she died in her 60s. And the doctors said, these people who lived in death camps, they really it shortened their lives because of the severe hardships they endured. So this is a wonderful history book from the Second World War. Very good. The next book is A Son of the Middle Border by Hamlin Garland, 1914. This is a tremendous book. It's an amazing story of a man who grew up on a farm in the American frontier. He was able to get to Boston, get an education, and become an outstanding author of books which describe life on the farm. Good, bad, and beautiful. Yeah, so this was an amazing book because the guy, farm work, especially in the old days, was very tedious, very long hours. You're outside, but, there you have the sun and the rain and then insects and then all this work you're doing, plowing the fields. So this fellow, the author, he was interested in something more than that, Hamlin Garland. So he was able to save his money, and somehow he got he was able to go to college, and he was interested in books and in writing. And at one point, he had to give up. For a while, he had to go back to farming. He talks about how hard it was because he was kind of out of shape, but anyway, he persevered. Amazing story. And then he wrote books describing life on the farm. Everything, the environment, the sky, the animals, and everything, and really created and did such a good job of really writing history. Somebody has to record history for people to study, when the past is gone in the future, and he did this. So really tremendous book, and how he just didn't give in to living this life of a farmer. He wanted more than that. He didn't just want to be doing this hard physical work all the time, and he did very, very well. Hamlin Garland wrote these wonderful books for people to read about his time period in the United States. The next book is Upon the Head of a Goat, or Upon the Head of the Goat by Aranka Siegel, 1981. This is a children's book. It won the Newbery Award. It's the story of a Jewish girl in the Ukraine and Hungary who lived through the Holocaust and survived. Yeah, just imagine another one of these. There's so many of these stories of people, and it's good that they wrote about it so that it's good to be aware of these things, what people went through, so we can be grateful. And if there's some type of crazy government that tries to, political force that tries to take power, that we should try to prevent that. Do what we can. Have courage. We need to be kind. We need to be we need to care, but we need to have courage and stand up for what's right, and not just go along with when there's an evil trend, which is trying to take power and do evil things. So this is a wonderful history book by Aranka Siegel. The next book is Honoring Sergeant Carter by Aileen G. Carter and Robert L. Allen, 2003. Edward Carter was an African-American war hero in Europe during the Second World War. Because of racism, he was kicked out of the Army. Years later, the wrong was righted when he was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. So he'd been a war hero, and the bad old days, the racist era, and so it was good. Even though he didn't live to see this, he died, but at least his children were able to see him vindicated and recognized for his heroism in the Second World War. So this was a good job. It's wonderful when people try to do these things to redeem. Hopefully, I just saw in the news the other day a guy had been in prison for 15 years, wrongfully convicted, and he's finally released. And that's wonderful when people make the effort to help fight injustice. And same thing here. This was an injustice that had been committed against this guy. He'd been a hero. He was kicked out of the Army. So the wrong was righted. So this fellow, Edward Carter, did a good job in the Second World War fighting Nazi Germany. The next book is The Girl Watchers Club by Harry Stein, 2004. This is the story of 3 World War II veterans who were friends, and they're friends when they were young, and then they all served in the Second World War, and over the years they stayed in touch. And as older men, they got together once a week for nostalgic purposes. So that's nice. Yeah, they talk about the old days, imagine they were retired, so they have time, and they can talk about what they went through, and it's fun. I have my friend Brent Lesheim. I made a video about him. He was here. It's nice to see friends that you knew from years ago, and walk down memory lane, talk about the old days and different people and what you did and different memories. And it's funny how people remember things differently, and so it's nice. This is a real nice book about these 3 old friends, who get together and have a good time enjoying nostalgia. The next book is Great Plains by Ian Fraser, 1989. This is an amazing book. Really enjoyed it. And it's the author traveled all over the Great Plains of America. Now remember, this is the flatlands in the west, or the western part of the country, before you get to the Rocky Mountains, between the Mississippi River and the Rocky Mountains, the states of Kansas, Nebraska, North and South Dakota, and Iowa, and so forth. And so the author, Ian Fraser, he traveled all over the Great Plains of America, had interesting experiences with nature, people, and historical sites. So he interacted with the local people of the time when he wrote this book, and he went to historical places where things had happened in history, and places where the famous people like Kit Carson, Sitting Bull, Buffalo Bill, Bonnie and Clyde, Wyatt Earp, Bat Masterson, Billy the Kid, and General George Custer, where they had did different things, historical things. So he went to these. That's a fun thing to do, to go to historical places. If you've read about a place, studied the history, and you can go there, pay your respects, and try to imagine, those people there. And I think there are certain vibrations in historical places which you can tune in with, and it's really enjoyable. So all these brave people that he was communing with from the past, and the interesting people he met in the present. He really had a tremendous adventure. Ian Fraser. I really enjoyed that book. The next book is Nothing Like It in the World: The Men Who Built the Transcontinental Railroad by Stephen E. Ambrose, 2000. This is an amazing history book. And it's about the amazing story of the humongous job of constructing a railroad which connected the east and west coasts of America and made travel to California quick. Talk about a big job. In other words, when they built a railroad from the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean in the United States. And this was going on in the 1800s. I believe they finished in 1869. They continued working through the Civil War. an enormous amount of work went into this. They had actually a lot of Chinese guys who were brought from China who worked because they had to, they had all these railroad ties, and they had the railroads, the metal parts. You have the wooden ties. You have to put gravel. You have to kind of make it flat in certain areas, so a lot of digging and putting in the gravel, and then the ties, and then the railroads. These the two big metal things that the railroads run on, and wow, a tremendous amount of work. And they had, and then you're going up in some places, the elevation's going up and down. There are rivers to cross, so you have to build a railroad bridge. Incredible work, and boy, they got it done. And it was a wonderful thing because today, we have automobiles, so we don't think about railroads very much. But years ago, when California, you had the California Gold Rush in 1849. And that's when you had all these guys going to California. And they didn't have there wasn't a railroad back then. So they had to, and boy, it could take months traveling by land, by horse and wagon. It could take a very long time. And the other ways, they could go down to Panama, cross the Panama, take a boat to Panama, cross through, before the Panama Canal was built, and cross over by land. I think there was a railroad there, a small railroad, or they could take a horse and then another boat to California. So the long trip, or they go all the way around South America. Anyway, this was an amazing accomplishment. That's why the book's called Nothing Like It in the World. Amazing story when they built a railroad. So you could travel from New York City to San Francisco when they finally put it in, I think in 5 or 6 days. Amazing accomplishment. It's amazing what people have done in this world. The next book is The Negro in Mississippi, 1865 to 1890, by Vernon Lane Wharton, 1947. This is a fascinating look at life among the ex-slaves in the United States. Slavery ended in 1865. And so this is a 25-year period after the Civil War, and what was life like for the African Americans who had achieved freedom. Now, early on, they had political power because they were used by the Republican Party, and in the South, actually, most Southerners, or a lot of Southerners, couldn't vote. So you had a domination of the Republican Party, and actually African Americans could vote, and some of them achieved. There were guys elected to U.S. Congress, the House of Representatives, and the Senate from the South, African Americans, and because they were allowed to vote, and a lot of Southerners couldn't vote because they were disqualified because of their service in the Confederacy. And the thing is, eventually the Southerners had things changed, and African Americans lost political power when finally there was just the North could not enforce its will in the South forever, and so the North finally had to let the South be, and then all the African Americans, they lost the right to vote, and then they were taken out, and they no longer could serve in Congress. So what happened is, as slavery ended, and then it was the beginning of second-class citizenship for African Americans. Yeah, they could move around the country. They had freedom of movement, but they still were mistreated. There was racism, and there was segregation. They were in different public schools for children, and they couldn't vote. And they were restricted. They had these different, like public drinking fountains, one black, one white, and same thing with bathrooms and movies and so forth. So this gets into that very interesting era right after the Civil War and what African Americans went through between 1865 and 1890. Thank you so much for watching. I really, really appreciate it. God bless you. Hope you find a good book to read, and I'll see you next time.